Next, we run a 15-minute portion of an hour-long committee hearing on the evidence-based funding model for elementary and secondary education. Speakers include Dr. Brent Clark of the Illinois Association of School Administrators, Michael Jacoby with the Illinois Association of School Business Officials, and Ralph Martire, the Executive Director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability. The entire hearing can be found on the Illinois Channel YouTube page. This runs about 15 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Davis and members of the committee. My name is Brent Clark. I represent the Illinois Association of School Administrators. We represent superintendents and school administrators all across the state of Illinois. Last year's historic passage of the evidence-based model turned Illinois in a new direction in terms of the way we move money around the state, out of the state, to school districts. So for that, we want to thank you for that heroic act. Although it took all summer, we still collectively achieved the goal at the end of August. So thank you for that. The base funding minimum started to flow in September, shortly thereafter, and stabilized schools, and we had no schools closing as had been threatened prior to the passage of the bill. We conducted approximately 30 to 40 trainings across the state of Illinois between January and March. Primarily with school administrators, and then later in the spring with some teacher union presidents discussing about how the evidence-based model would work and how the money would flow and how they could spend it once they received it in their district. As you know, and as Robert Wolf from ISB testified, the new tier funding started to flow to districts in April. So at this point, they've received approximately 50% of the new tier funding. We're expecting they'll receive the last half of that by the end of the fiscal year. And as a result of that, districts are now spending time with their boards, with their communities, and with their teachers discussing how they're going to take their new tier funding and apply that to their school district to improve academic achievement for all of their kids. The 34 cost centers that have now been identified, I think we've all referred to them as 26 or 27 elements, but practically speaking, there's 34 cost centers. Those are identified, and the trainings have been conducted to focus districts on spending those new dollars in as much as possible around those 34 cost centers. So as we go into FY19, if we can find the teachers and the personnel, as you are well aware, I'm sure, there is a bit of a teacher shortage beginning to show up in Illinois. There's a bit of an employee shortage showing up in Illinois in certified positions. So if we can find those people, you're going to see jobs posted, you're going to see jobs created in school districts like hasn't been done in the last 8 to 9 years because of the cuts in education funding. Now, following a long tenure, a spiral, if you will, downward of funding for schools, and with that, what was obviously a cynical view of the state by many people, and particularly people in our ranks, there is a palpable sense of excitement about beginning to improve schools, beginning to have a new accountability system that they can incorporate against the funding model, and you're going to see, I think, a turn in attitude toward the improvement of schools and the ability to put people on the ground to do things with kids. So as you consider the state's FY19 budget, I would respectfully request that the minimum funding level be appropriated, and that's $350 million. Keep in mind that there's another $50 million that would need to be set aside for the property tax relief component. That's a part of the bill. We're not sure how many districts exactly will access that pool of dollars, but we do need to stick with at least 350 going through the formula in order to continue the move from where we're at in terms of adequacy another year closer toward moving all districts at least to the 90% point. And with that, I'll turn it on over to my balance of my panel members.
Thank you. I'm Ben Bohr, Deputy Director with Advance Illinois, and you have a presentation in front of you that I'll be speaking to. I think really appreciate both Robert's and Brent's remarks, and I think the first thing just to sort of take a moment and breathe is the formula really worked. It really focused the dollars that we appropriated last year and focused them on the districts that are the least adequately funded in the state. As Robert mentioned, $366 million new dollars went through the tiers to districts. 80% of those dollars went to districts that are over 50% low income. Over 70% of the new dollars went to districts below the median property wealth. So both our low property wealth districts and our low income districts got large investments in money. In fact, there is no, after these dollars went in, there are no districts under 50% adequately funded, and I think that's something to be cheered for in the state. About 25 districts made gains of 5% of adequacy, real impact on the amount of adequate funds they have as a district. On the next slide, what you see is where we really started. And as you can see here, we have a wide range of funding amongst our districts in the state. We had districts as low as 46% funded, all the way up to districts that were over 200% funded. The $350 million, as I said, makes a real difference, and you can see the number of students below 60% of adequacy, below 70% of adequacy. Close to 1.2 million students are below 70% of adequacy. So we still have a lot of work to do. So while this was a huge first step, we have to continue investing in the formula to get our students the services and the supports that they need. On the next slide, we have just another diagram, and I should note that these diagrams are on a dashboard that you can find on Advance Illinois' website. It's interactive. You can go through these numbers and look at numbers for particular districts, but also look at where the money has flowed. So what you can see is that the most dollars went to those districts below 60%. Close to $200 million went to districts below 60% funded. Those are the districts that are in the dark red. We also had about $147 million go to districts between 60 and 70% of adequacy. Again, real impact on our district, and I know Ralph is going to give a little bit more detailed breakdown on the averages across the state, because as we can see, the inadequacy is really across the state, and so the money flowed throughout the state as well. Just as a highlight, we have two districts here, Centralia High School District, which was funded at 51% of adequacy, that received $712 new dollars per student, an increase of 5% in their adequacy. And Harvard, that had an increase of about $900 per student in their funding. Critically, we are starting to close the gap, both to the amount of money, the equal amount of funding between our low-income and our non-low-income students, and starting to close a gap to equity. So what we can see here, and it's what we knew was the issue in Illinois, a large issue in Illinois, is that low-income students, on average across the state, are funded at 68% of adequacy. Higher-income students are funded at about 82% of adequacy. About $245 went to those low-income students, and about $130 went to higher-income students. So we've closed the gap about $115. If you look at the resources in the formula, there's about a $900 gap between low-income and non-low-income students. This is represented, as you may recall, in the Ed Trust report that we've used in prior testimony that showed that Illinois students, low-income students, have far less money spent on them than the higher-income students. This funding at $350 million, $366 that went through the formula, is what's required to start to make steps to close that gap. And that we see that with the $115 here. And it's really important that we get $350 million through the formula.
And so when we ask for $400 million with $50 million going into property tax relief and $350 million going into the formula, we're looking at that as the minimum possible investment you could make for this year. And we look forward to continuing to have this dialogue over the next decade as we try to make that constitutional article come to life, where every student is able to be educated to the limits of their capacities. Turn it over to you for questions.
Thank you very much. Before we get into questions, I think something that you stated, Dr. Jacoby, and I think it was in Ralph's presentation, make sure I understand it. So if we continue to make the investments, sometimes we talk about how we save money in the state. By making an investment in this, we have savings on the back end. The governor says it a lot. So I can extrapolate from what you said that as long as we continue to make this investment, or for that matter, if every year we're able to put more in than the 350 million, there's a savings that comes to the state because we're reducing incarceration, things of that nature. Any of you care to comment on that?
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's what every research and peer-reviewed research-based study shows about these investments, and that's the power of what you did when you moved to an evidence-based formula. You moved to a school funding formula that ties the investment into the educational practices that have been shown to enhance student achievement. And when you get that enhanced student achievement in the form of lower dropout rates, higher graduation rates, higher college attendance rates, higher college graduation rates, you see significantly greater salaries, median incomes in your state over time, and significant reduced social costs. So it truly is, and we did a report, and I could make it available to the committee, where we summarized, we just did a meta-analysis of all these ROI, return on investment, evidence-based return on investments that have been found nationally, and it's really powerful. And so we're moving down that road, Chairman Davis. We have a long way to go, but the investment on the front end will save taxpayers significant money on the back end, and they will raise our state GDP, and they will raise median and mean wage.
Now, the report that you just, first of all, let me add Representative Sosnowski to the role. The report that you just highlighted, is it as simple as if we add 350 in, or 350 in, you can quantify a reduction in the Department of Corrections. You can quantify a reduction in the number of people on public assistance. Things like that.
There are tables like that.
There are
yeah.
tables
I mean,
like
the
that?
investments do have to be going into the evidence-based practice, is why it's important you passed an evidence-based funding bill.
Right.
But yes, as long as they're going into the evidence-based practices, there is a, for this dollar in, you get that out.
I think if that's something, well, if you could share that study with our staff, we'll share with the Republican staff. If anybody's just remotely interested in what we can save by continuing to do this, I think it would be great information for us to have moving forward.
I would just add that there's new research coming out of Northwestern that shows that investments in low-income students really show appreciable gains in student results. And, that's the sort of forerunner for exactly the data that Ralph is mentioning. As those students demonstrate greater growth, they're able to achieve higher proficiencies rates in our state. More of them are prepared to go to college. Those students are more productive citizens in Illinois. And that's really the critical, as Mike pointed out, around educating all of the students to the best of their capacities.
And the rate of return on investment is now beyond argument. So we had our study peer-reviewed, and one of the peer reviewers of our study was Dr. Eric Hanushek, the head of the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, who's written extensively that money doesn't matter in education. It's all about choice, it's all about vouchers, and it's all about getting rid of bad teachers. He peer-reviewed our study on the return on investment and passed it, said that yes, the findings were reliable and statistically verifiable. So we even went to someone who's ideologically not in the camp, because we felt it's important to take ideology out of this discussion. When you have research evidence-based practices that really can provide a benefit for your state, we should be all working together to achieve that goal and make that investment. So I will emphasize the fact that we had broad peer review of this research from a broad ideological spectrum.